Hi and welcome to AfriqueCanada TV. I'm Leila Lemgalef at the International Civil Aviation Organization headquarters in Montreal during the 38th session assembly. Today, here we'll be hearing perspectives on safety levels in aviation among African countries within the context of increasingly global aviation structures and infrastructures. First off will be the Director of the Air Navigation Bureau of ICAO, Nancy Graham, followed by the Director General of the Mauritanian National Agency of Civil Aviation, Aboubekerine Seddigh Ould Mohamed El Hassan. Thank you very much for having us at ICAO headquarters. Mrs. Nancy Graham, would you please start off by giving us a brief overview of your professional background?
I'm an unusual animal. My background is early in my days as a torpedo mechanic. However, in the last 20 years, I've been focused on aviation and specifically aviation safety. A lot of what is done in different fields as it relates to safety has a lot of commonality. So for many years I worked for the Federal Aviation Administration in different parts of the world and came to ICAO about 6 years ago. And my responsibilities here include everything related to safety, all of the 13 disciplines of air navigation and the audit program.
We are heading into the last few months of 2013, and I read about ICAO's holistic approach to aviation safety. Would you give us a brief overview of safety standards and activities today?
Indeed. So one of ICAO's roles is to develop the international standards for safety, for air navigation, for security, for environment. And in the safety area, we've had a very long history of doing so, since 1944, as a matter of fact. And we've seen quite an evolution over the years, and particularly in the last few years. There's been a real focus, and that has been fueled largely by technology in safety. You see very, very safe aircraft. You see wonderfully trained professionals and a real culture of aviation safety. Mm-hmm. So as a result of all of that, plus the partnership with a variety of international organizations, you see the safest skies in the world in the last 2 years.
Would you like to expand on that and tell us a bit more what that involved?
Indeed. So the number one issue that we face today in terms of safety for passengers is runway excursions, meaning when an aircraft goes beyond the runway, and runway incursions, when something that shouldn't be on the runway is on the runway. And we have a program called Runway Safety, which addresses those things. And we have a practical set of tools for each airport working with its international community, because it's air navigation service providers or air traffic controllers, mm-hmm. pilots that use that fly the aircraft, and the airports themselves have to work together to understand that very highly choreographed environment to keep those runways and the surrounding aprons safe. And so we've put a lot of focus there, and we've had an international symposium here and then a series of regional events. Our second area of priority is something called loss of control, which is a big category. But it has in its category what happened, for example, with Air France, where a pilot loses what we call situational awareness, mm-hmm. The situation surprises the pilot and then they lose control. We also saw that in the most recent situation in San Francisco, mm-hmm. as well.
So we're going to turn to African countries.
Okay.
In relation to safety standards, how are African countries doing?
Actually, we are seeing a lot of improvement in Africa. And I'm very happy to say that. It's a challenging area to work because there are many demands on the resources in Africa. We all know that, and in many of the developing countries. But ICAO for the last 6 years has had a program called the AFI program, mm-hmm. which has specifically focused on African countries and providing assistance in areas where we know there are particular challenges, either a lack of understanding of the international rules and regulations, or a lack of human resources, or a lack of training. But particularly in the last few years, we've focused on the political will. Before you can really make a change, you have to have the political will to do so. And that's so important for states because aviation is a huge economic engine. It brings jobs, it brings transport for goods, it brings the economic fuel that you need to really develop.
So we're just going to trickle into that question. If you would please tell us what African country has emerged as a country that has improved in its best practices and its standards of safety in aviation.
I would be pleased to do that. In fact, Mauritania is one of them. In fact, the challenge that they faced is they were one of the countries that had one of the lowest levels of implementation of the standards and regulations that are practiced by the international aviation community. On a scale of 0 to 100, they were at 32% implementation, which is, at least when I went to school, an F. Really bad. Okay. And in a span of just more than a year, recently we reevaluated Mauritania, and they have improved their implementation of these standards to 75%. Now, the global average is 60%. So that's quite high, actually, and on par with many of the states around the world. So huge progress in a relatively short period of time. I have to say that's down to both political will and a very, very active Director General for Aviation. We call him our latest superstar in Africa.
I know that in part Mauritania did use ICAO's resources to make those improvements.
Partially.
If you could just tell us how you would describe ICAO's impact and influence on African development of safety.
Sure. So ICAO is a tiny organization. We're one of 4 specialized organizations of the United Nations. Throughout the world, we have less than 600 people, so it's very tiny. We have 2 African regional offices, and they have 6 or 8 people that are specialized in all of the disciplines of aviation. What ICAO's resources are in this arena is we help the states provide a plan of action. So we sit down with them and actually work through, this is what you need to do in order to improve these scores. These are the critical areas that are most related to risk and that are most likely to cause an aviation accident. So we spend time with them and help them develop an overall plan. We also work with the minister and even in some cases the president of the country to make certain that that Director General has the backing necessary to get the resources to actually make those kinds of improvements. And in the case of Mauritania, though, they went and really worked with their neighbors, which I have to say is fantastic. We totally support regional working organizations, regional solutions. Each state is different and each region is different. But this particular DG was very clever. He used a system that we have in ICAO called iStars, which is a transparent system about the scores of audits. And he looked at his neighbors to see who had higher scores than he did. And he went to those neighbors and he entered into agreements with them for assistance. So rather than the limited resources of ICAO, I would say it was quite ingenious on his part to really look at the resources of his neighbors and the experience there that really did help him.
Can you please tell us about the recently nominated Regional Aviation Safety Group Chairman?
I can. In fact, each of the regions has something called a Regional Aviation Safety Group. It's a new initiative, and it's been formulated so that the region helps itself. It takes on board safety initiatives and then spreads that message across its particular region. Your Director General was recently nominated as the chairman of the African Regional Aviation Safety Group. In this case, it's Pan-African, so it's across Africa. And the focus of that group is to do exactly what he just did, which is to move those states from a very low effective of implementation, the ones that need the assistance, to a much higher effective implementation rate so that it really supports African safety across the continent. He was chosen because of his both experience but also because of his enthusiasm and energy for aviation safety. And so he should be, and Mauritania should be very proud of that nomination. I fully expect, knowing him well, that he will be helping a lot of states make that significant movement and that big jump in aviation safety.
I learned on your website that air traffic is expected to double in the next 15 years. Can you tell us a bit about initiatives going forward, including, I think, GASP initiative?
Yep. During this assembly, which is why we're here for these 2 weeks, we have two plans that are really going to lead the future of aviation. One is called the Global Aviation Safety Plan, and it lays out those 2 priorities I mentioned before, things having to do with the runway and also this loss of control issue. And in the area of air navigation, we have something called the Global Air Navigation Plan, and it's outlined 3 priorities. One is performance, performance-based navigation, which basically means there's a bubble around the aircraft that we know the aircraft won't deviate beyond based on its capabilities, and we allow it to enter into and protect airspace specifically for that bubble. That's called performance-based navigation. And then we have something called continuous descent operation, continuous climb operation. Basically, an aircraft, when it takes off and then it levels off, and it takes off and it rises and levels off. We actually want them to be able to cruise climb to a certain altitude and to descend at a certain rate. That saves fuel, which is better for our environment. So a lot of the work that we're doing is supportive of reduced emissions, which is good for the environment and is good for the economics. So what we've developed is a series of modules, small incremental improvements that will be taken on by all states, but at the rate in which they need them. So it's a bit like a Rubik's Cube. You know, you pick the ones that you need based on your density of traffic. At the end of the day, however, it makes sure that your flying experience in Africa is the same as your flying experience in Asia or North America or anywhere else.
Thank you very much. And finally, before signing off, what message, if any additional message, would you have for our viewers on this African rubric?
Well, I would say I am very bullish on Africa. I think there's tremendous potential there. You do have bright spots where you're seeing some real leadership in Africa. This is one example in Mauritania. Sudan is another where we've seen some significant improvements. We have only hope for the future, and I think in particular aviation brings a globe smaller and smaller, and it is the economic engine for growth. So we really want to see a lot of focus put on aviation so that it brings a brighter future for all Africans.
Thank you so very much for your time, and on behalf of AfriqueCanada.tv and its audiences, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks. Cette interview se déroule dans le bureau de la représentation du groupe du Maghreb arabe à l'OACI. Merci beaucoup d'être ici avec nous à AfriqueCanada.tv. La Mauritanie a enregistré des remarquables progrès depuis 2010. Pouvez-vous nous en dire davantage?
Effectivement, la Mauritanie, en fin 2010, était portée sur la liste noire de l'Union européenne. Le niveau d'implémentation des exigences de l'OACI était extrêmement bas. Il était aux environs de 32%. Aujourd'hui, nous avons un niveau d'implémentation qui dépasse les 74%. Et on peut dire aujourd'hui que le niveau de satisfaction ou d'implémentation des normes et des bonnes pratiques en matière d'aviation civile en Mauritanie sont parmi celles les plus élevées, d'abord dans le continent, mais on se situe également parmi le tiers des pays du monde qui sont à peu près dans la très bonne voie.
Comment a fait la Mauritanie pour parvenir à ce rang?
Très bien. Il faut savoir tout d'abord qu'il faut une volonté politique. Et la volonté politique en Mauritanie a été très claire, aussi bien sur le plan de l'aviation civile, mais aussi sur l'environnement global de cette activité. Donc nous avons reçu des instructions extrêmement claires pour asseoir une dynamique visant à résoudre tous les problèmes qui sont liés à cette activité. Et nous avons également reçu les moyens financiers et les moyens humains pour être à la hauteur des requis demandés par l'Organisation internationale de l'aviation civile. C'est ça qui nous a permis aujourd'hui d'être parmi les nations les plus respectées sur le plan de l'aviation civile.
Oui, et vous faites d'ailleurs partie du Club des champions?
Effectivement, nous avons été, depuis l'année passée, déclarés comme étant membres du Club des champions d'Afrique. Et récemment, lors de la réunion des ministres, l'OACI a déclaré la Mauritanie comme étant la superstar de l'Afrique. Et nous avons également reçu les compliments de l'Union européenne à travers la déclaration de M. Kallas, le vice-président. Ça nous fait chaud au cœur et nous pensons que ceci est le fruit d'abord de l'engagement politique de notre direction nationale et le fruit également du travail laborieux du team de l'ANAC globalement, mais aussi des autres composantes de l'activité de l'aviation civile, que ce soit la compagnie aérienne, des responsables de la gestion de l'aéroport, mais aussi les responsables de la météo et des autres parties concernées.
La Mauritanie a été élue Superstar. Pouvez-vous nous en dire davantage?
Écoutez, oui, la Mauritanie a effectivement franchi le cap de 74% de niveau d'implémentation, ce qui nous situe aujourd'hui au rang de 4e ou 5e d'Afrique, premier du Maghreb arabe parce que nous étions 2e après la Tunisie, et nous restons toujours premier de la communauté de la SECNA. Ceci fait qu'on a mérité effectivement ces titres. Je saisis cette occasion pour féliciter la Mauritanie, mon pays qui m'est très cher, pour cette réalisation, qui est le fruit de la volonté politique et du team de l'aviation civile de manière globale.
Comment d'autres pays africains et aussi sur le plan international peuvent-ils s'inspirer des exemples de la Mauritanie?
Écoutez, les bonnes pratiques sont dépliables. En Mauritanie, nous avons effectivement eu la chance d'avoir un appui politique très fort. En plus de cela, ce que je peux conseiller aux autres, c'est d'abord de s'assurer de l'appui politique. Il faut bien entendu une vision assez claire, il faut des plans d'action bien soutenus, il faut une rigueur dans la gestion, il faut également mettre en place un plan et un programme de formation extrêmement soutenu pour avoir des inspecteurs très bien formés. Et il faut respecter également la décision des inspecteurs. Voilà globalement les clés du succès. Les clés du succès sont en fait bien étayées dans l'approche du PDCA qu'on appelle le plan de Check Act. Il faut préparer tout ce que l'on veut faire. Il faut les réaliser. Il faut s'assurer qu'on a atteint les objectifs. Et il faut prendre ensuite des décisions correctives si on voit qu'on n'a pas atteint les objectifs. Si cette rigueur est là, nous pensons que tout le monde peut réussir. Bien entendu, il faut savoir que chez les voisins, il y a toujours de bonnes solutions dans un domaine ou dans un autre. N'hésitez pas de les contacter, de voir leurs bonnes pratiques, de s'en inspirer. Voilà une clé du succès. Et il faut bien entendu la transparence la plus totale dans tous les actes, parce que l'aviation civile ne supporte pas du tout la médiocrité du travail. Il faut faire les choses avec cœur et il faut les faire avec excellence.
Dans quelle mesure est-ce que les outils de l'OACI ont permis à la Mauritanie de se rendre au niveau de qualité où elle se trouve?
L'OACI a mis en place un ensemble d'éléments indicatifs extrêmement importants dans la compréhension des normes et des bonnes pratiques. Ils sont diffusés à travers son site web et je conseille à tous d'aller sur ISTAR pour découvrir ces bonnes pratiques. Voilà, une fois encore, un outil qui peut servir tous pour améliorer la sécurité dans leur pays.
Et quand est-ce que Mauritania Airlines International atterrira en Amérique du Nord?
Nous allons d'abord atterrir à Paris, parce que pour le moment, nous desservons Las Palmas. Paris est prévu en fin d'année. Ici, le marché américain est un marché prometteur. Mauritania Airlines n'hésitera pas une seconde d'aller aux États-Unis.
Avez-vous un dernier mot pour vos frères africains?
Je commencerai d'abord par les Mauritaniens au Canada et les Mauritaniens aux États-Unis, en les saluant et en leur disant que la Mauritanie est un pays qui deviendra bientôt émergent en matière d'aviation civile, que le gouvernement vient de réaliser un aéroport international qui sera ouvert en 2014 et que l'aviation civile demande des ressources humaines extrêmement compétentes. Je les demande de s'orienter vers ce créneau. Je dirais également aux autres Africains, mes collègues, qu'il est tout à fait possible de duplier le cas de la Mauritanie. Il suffit de la volonté politique, il suffit d'une rigueur et un amour pour ce que l'on fait.
Merci beaucoup de nous avoir accordé cette entrevue et au nom d'AfriqueCanada.tv, nous vous souhaitons un très bon reste de séjour au Canada.
Merci.